life still happens regardless of a chronic illness. So you can't pause life, unfortunately. In as much as I wish we can do that, so I can take a much needed break, I couldn't.
Right. So Tavishima Adongo. I'm from Benue. I was born there, and then my parents also lived there, at least for most of their life. And well, I'm a medical doctor by profession. Yes, I studied here in Nigeria. Yes, in Ibadan. And then I have been practicing since graduation for about 6 years now. Yes, as a medical officer.
My name is Sickle. I'm a lawyer, I'm a podcaster. So I have sickle cell anemia. I was born with the condition. I've always had sickle cell anemia. It's not something that you just go to the hospital one day and find out that you caught it. I was born this way.
I first came to the realization and then understood the full importance or effect that I had a genetic disorder.
I've always had it, but I didn't always know that I had it. Later, when I was growing up, later on, I came to find out that I had been a sick child growing up. My parents would tell me stories of how maybe when I was a baby or between 1 to 3, 4, I was rushed to the hospital and we had to stay overnight, and it was very scary and stuff like that. I had those stories told to me later on. I don't have any memories of being sick as a child.
When I was growing up with my parents, it was always don't do this, don't do that.
Okay, Hikma, go and wear more like warm clothes.
Stay out of the cold, try and drink lots of water.
Take water, take fruits. I always ate well growing up.
Say, no, you can't do this because, it's going to be hard on you and all of that. So, but then when I went to the university, first year in the university, I was alone and far away from the care of home. And then, it hit me. I had an incident, an episode, and then I was taken to the clinic, and then of course, the doctors, did my blood group and genotype test, and then as they had suspected, and then they found that I had sickle cell, and then of course they started explaining what it really meant and all of that to me. And then it really, sort of hit me. And then I realized,
But we never had the conversation about me having sickle cell until one fateful day. I think we were watching, I can't remember what program it was, honestly. I think it must have been NTA or DITV or KSTV back then. And there was a documentary ongoing about this girl who had about sickle cell anemia generally, and on the screen then I saw this girl who had crisis, and she was in so much pain, and out of curiosity I turned to my mom and I asked her what's wrong with that girl, and my mom said, she has sickle cell and you are like her, you have sickle cell as well. And that was the first time ever the conversation ever got brought up.
Thinking back, I could now see why I had so many limitations, so to speak, growing up. You are trying to prove, in a certain sense, that you are also complete, so to speak.
Let's just say Nigeria is not doing good enough. My experience in the medical world in Nigeria has not been that great. From doctors telling me, I went to the IE center one time and we had to talk because so for somebody with sickle cell anemia, it's connected to everything. Because I went to the IE center, it's connected to your eyes, it's connected to your legs, your ear, your earring, your head, everything, neurological, everything. So I went to this hospital, and this doctor had the temerity to tell me, I pity you, I feel sorry for you, because people that have this condition, they don't used to live long. To me having serious crisis and going to the hospital and a nurse yelling at me for crying because how you are so big, why are you crying? As big as you are. So apart from those, I feel like there is a big bias thing with the medical practitioners and just the medical space with sickle cell. People judge you already, and that affects your care and your treatment. It affects you mentally and physically as well.
Initially, the core focus of our health services dealt with, right from the colonial era, dealt with the diagnosis and then treatment of infectious diseases. Now, of course, to the our colonizers that came, that was majorly the focus, because of course when they came there was a lot of incidents of infectious illnesses, malaria, the parasitic infections, guinea worm, all of them, onchocerciasis, all these were there in abundance with us, right? So there's been this heavy emphasis and intervention on infectious disease diagnosis and then treatment and prevention. And then when you look at it in terms of disease intervention, when for infectious disease or non-communicable disease, for instance, it's usually a bit more straightforward. You see malaria, you catch it, you can almost use your microscope, you see this is malaria, and then you treat it, and then your patient is well, and then they go. If they're able to stay away from mosquitoes, they cannot have malaria for the rest of their life, right? Same thing with, say, guinea worm. Same thing with some of the other infectious diseases as well. There's something causing it. You find it, you deal with it, and you separate that from the people. So our health service has also more or less taken a bit of this fineness along the line. So if you see, for instance, our diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of malaria is not so top notch, but it's quite good. It's something every health professional comes across easily, and then they see it and then prevent it. Then of course, as we started growing, our health dynamics started changing, and what that meant is we also started looking at areas where we didn't look at previously. So, for instance, children started being born with maybe congenital illnesses or other diseases, and then of course, doctors will have to more or less come in contact with them and then learn to diagnose and then treat. Same thing. We started having different aspects and population dynamics, and then we started having things like more prevalence of hypertension, diabetes, and all of that over the years. Now, this is not to say perhaps this hadn't been there previously or something, but just that, the incidence was a bit low, and then there was a bit less focus on it. But then as we started improving and then increasing, they started coming up more, and then we have better ways of diagnosing these illnesses now and all of that. So focus is a bit changing. So in that aspect, I would like to say that it's as the population health demography is changing, we're having to stop and focus on other things as well. And then of course, so as those are coming up, health practitioners, healthcare workers are also tending to shift focus and look at all of those other aspects. So that's why there seems to be an apparent gap, so to speak, on that.
I feel like as somebody who has this chronic illness, as somebody who has this chronic condition, especially as I look like this, I feel like most people just, when you say, oh, I have sickle cell anemia, even now, watching me, most of you already judged me just now. You really have sickle cell anemia? How big you look. I feel like that's what people say. They have this bias. Whenever you say you have a certain chronic illness, in my case, sickle cell anemia, they expect me to look a certain way. And when I don't look that certain way, they discountenance how I feel. And, they micromanage how you feel. which affects you mentally as well, because you feel like you're alone and nobody's listening to you. It feels like I'm shouting, I'm saying, see me, and everybody chooses to be blind to how I feel. And it really affects, like I said earlier, how you feel mentally and emotionally affects you physically. So it would lead to crisis and other things.
When I come in contact with, persons or patients, mostly patients, the first thing feeling I usually have is empathy. Yeah, because of course, definitely I can say I understand when you say, okay, I'm having pain, and then maybe say, is this severe or is that severe, and all of that, or I'm having pain here, I'm having pain there. Then there's the feeling of connection. Okay, I can understand your pain, I can understand what you're going through. And then of course sometimes there are other, say, even psychological or mental and even social aspects that living with a chronic disease can throw someone living with that into, that you can get to also perhaps relate and understand with them, and be able to offer help and teach them better coping mechanisms or advice. Okay, so for instance, maybe on the need of friendship, then the need of building intimacy, and then how do you start having genuine relationships and or forming genuine friendships and all of that. And then, okay, how do you have the zeal to sort of like pursue your day-to-day activities and manage it with your health condition without the need to try and prove that I want to measure up with everybody's strength, so to speak. You have to you have to explain to patients that, okay, you have to learn to develop and measure up strengths in different areas and then different aspects, and then not necessarily physical most of the time and all of that. So that usually helps.
I feel like people think they're empathetic, but they're actually condescending sometimes. They're condescending and patronizing. There was this time at my workplace, I took a short break because I had crisis. And when I got back, somebody at work was like, and I think he thought he's coming from a place of, I don't know, I think he thought he's coming from a good place. That's why I'm not too upset. But this person went ahead to advise me, to tell me that I should, you are still battling this condition. Sure, you have NIS though. You have NHIS. Did you not go to the UK? You can just go and do the surgery. Okay. I didn't know that. That's news to me. So I feel like people think that they're coming off as giving good advice, but it comes off as condescending, because in as much as you think that I'm not saying not to share information. Information is good, because you might have information about my condition that I may not necessarily have. You might know something, or by virtue of like family members or friends, you might come across legit information that I don't have. The right way to do it is give information, not advice, to people with chronic illness. Give information. Let me open up the conversation. If the person with chronic illness does not open up the conversation, it means that they do not want to have that conversation with you. And you shouldn't force it. You shouldn't push it. It's not about you. That's just, I feel like I needed to just have that out there. The thing about people saying I should just go and do the surgery. First of all, the surgery has complications that can lead to death. The illness itself can lead to death. And that's another thing. When you have chronic illness and you meet people and they just don't have social cues, and then they tell you, this has happened to me before. People telling me, oh, I had a cousin that died. Oh, so bad. I have a cousin that died of sickle cell. Okay, Sally. Thank you for that information. And I feel like people tend to give unsolicited advice, and I would rather they share information. The thing about that surgery I was telling you about is, apart from the serious implications of the surgery, which I said can lead to death, is also the fact that it is so expensive. I have to go through chemo to do that surgery, and it may not work. I think, or rather I believe that in Nigeria, the main problem that we have with some certain chronic illness is the lack of awareness and the lack of training I believe that the medical practitioners themselves need to get training on how to talk to people that have certain conditions. Not to be biased to myself, but even when I was in the UK and I was going through treatment, I would generally feel much more comfortable having been treated by somebody who was probably looked like me or could understand me to a certain degree. It's very important. Inclusivity is not just good on paper. It should not just be nice to read about. It should also lead to you having a certain duty of care, especially as a medical practitioner. You should know how to talk to your patients. You should know how not to trigger them. There are certain things not to say, and I feel like this is something that should be taught.
This is more or less to the healthcare professionals. I read a book recently. Well, sorry, I can't remember the title exactly or the author, but I know for sure the author is a medical doctor. So he talks about the reason why most of us sometimes become doctors, and then to a broader extent health professionals as well. So he talked about this deep desire and hope or dream that and satisfaction that we usually get when we treat people and then they get well and then they go back to their houses. In a certain sense, it's sort of like a reaffirming of your own conviction why perhaps you're a healthcare professional. But you see, with chronic illnesses especially, it's different. Your patients are going to challenge you most of the time, and most of the time you're going to be left wondering, with these patients on your hands, why I can't seem to satisfy this particular patient or treat this particular patient quite fully. And in a certain sense that hurts your ego, as the kind of work you do, and then maybe perhaps even your knowledge and pride. But the truth about it is that's why there are chronic illnesses. You manage as they come, and to the patients, they would have to learn to adjust with that and then live with it. And also it's also going to test their conception of who they are or who they think they are as individuals. And then that's what's it called, in a certain sense, that ideal that sometimes we define a human being by you have to be like this, you have to be like this, you have to be like this. In this sense, this part is missing, this part is missing, this part is missing. So how you learn to be whole? How do you learn to be whole with all of that? And then for your healthcare professionals, how do they learn to go on treating, knowing that this person is not going to be, let me just use the term loosely now, fully whole in your predefined criteria.
There's a certain grief surrounding sickle cell anemia in regards to your mortality. A lot of people, over the course of my life, few people have told me about how they know somebody who has died. The mortality rate for sickle cell anemia is 65 or something like that. So I feel like there's most definitely a certain grief surrounding it. It's almost like you're living with the Grim Reaper behind you, because whether or not this is your story, it's always at the back of your mind. People almost won't let you rest about it. And whether or not it's your story, it's almost at the back of your mind. It's like gnawing at you. And because of the lack of conversations surrounding this particular chronic illness and discussions surrounding those issues that needs to be had, there's no outlet. Ideally, there should be therapy and counseling for those who have this chronic illness, but there isn't. So you can imagine a poor young child of, let's say, 15, or less, or even older, being told several times about how, this is the mortality, or even inevitably seeing their loved ones, watching them, being with them in the hospital, and they then have to handle all of this, and there's no outlet to talk about it. There's no conversation being had about it, even between parents and their children, between the hospital and the patient. There's nothing. It's not enough to treat us physically. There's a big lag in our emotional and mental well-being as well, which also suffers inevitably. So in the future, I really hope that this is something that, conversations around this certain issue needs to be had. It's very important. It affects mentally. There's no way you would go through sickle cell anemia, for example, and not suffer depression. It comes hand in hand. Sickle cell anemia itself is a condition such as, let's say you get a crisis in your leg, you have to learn how to walk again. You need crutches. You need space, you need constant massage and physiotherapy. Sometimes you may have serious crisis that leads to you needing physiotherapy afterwards, because you're literally learning how to walk again. But we live in a community where you can't even express how you feel because of the society, because of our myths and folklores and whatnot. The moment you tell somebody, oh, I'm feeling depressed, I am feeling suicidal from having a crisis, they tell you to shut up because you shouldn't curse yourself. Well, damn, we are cursed, technically. So how do you navigate this without having the conversation? You can't. So I believe that it's something that we need to really set the ball rolling. We should really consider it because it's that important.
For those with, say, chronic illnesses who are training to be various healthcare profession, I would like to say this. So it's going to be a huge avenue for you to understand your patients, and also a huge, avenue for you to contribute towards management of your patients with your own, real understanding and knowing of the situation with your colleagues. So, it's going to be a very interesting experience. So I can't tell you how yours will be, but I'll just tell you it's going to be very fascinating and interesting.